at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel. Look at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel.
Welcome back, and today we've got something special. So special I reference it in my channel poster. Yes, today we shall be tackling the killer office chair movies. Okay, no, it's Hellraiser. Yes, today we start an epic 9 movies review series. The very series that gave me the inspiration to do this show. And, without giving away too much, a series that epitomizes what this show stands for. So, without further ado, I give you Hellraiser. Now, I do need to clarify something here. Although I believe Hellraiser to be a good movie, I don't subscribe to the idea that it's some kind of art piece that needs to be studied and interpreted. Firstly, because Mr. Clive Barker himself says this.
The thing is constructed like a sort of grim French farce.
And secondly, have you seen where this series ends up? Fuck me. So let's not take it too seriously, shall we? I feel I'm the average kind of viewer, so if I don't see it, you're looking too hard. The movie begins in an unspecified region of the world with a transaction taking place.
Take it. It's yours. It always was.
Yes, the box was always yours. I'm still going to charge you massive wads of cash for it though. The now very sweaty man sits alone in a square of candles manipulating the box until he finds a hidden button opening it. Unfortunately, instead of a candy surprise inside, it's something we'll become intimately acquainted with throughout these films. Hooked chains. Then, with the house quiet and in disrepair, all hell breaks loose up in the attic as the room has been transformed into a torture room, with swinging pillars of viscera and more hooked chains, as the Cenobites, as we'll come to know them, survey the scene and for some reason, their leader reconstructs the man's face on the floor. Which has to be, not the worst, we'll get to that one later, but one of the worst special effects. However, I don't care, it works. It's visually striking, and it serves to show what the Cenobites are capable of. Then the lead Cenobite, or Pinhead as he will become, returns the box to its original configuration and everything is back to normal, like it didn't even happen. Now maybe time has dulled that opening somewhat, but I still think the what the fuck atmosphere it was going for is pretty effective, even today, despite how ubiquitous and well known the character of Pinhead is, which I do feel is a detriment to these films, but that's for later sequels. With the house now empty, 2/3 of our main characters show up at the door. Bickering husband and wife, Larry, played by a pre-Deep Space Nine Andrew Robinson, and Julia, played by Claire Higgins. They're moving in as the house is Larry's childhood home. They look around finding loads of religious paraphernalia, and for some reason, that's enough to convince Larry they should move in immediately. Not sure what convinces him exactly, that house is a shithole. Which is a testament to the set dressers because it was, and still is, a real house used today. Let's hope they've spruced it up a little bit by now. Larry looks in the kitchen, which makes the house a bargain. Look at all the fresh food available to eat. So fresh it's positively wriggling. Seriously, who would want to live in that house? Everything is telling these people not to move in there.
Larry!
Jesus, that sounds serious.
Where are you?
In here.
Oh, never mind. She changed the tune pretty quickly. Actually, you'll find that characters have a lot of just strange reactions to things in this film. But anyway, turns out they found the man's stuff who was Larry's brother Frank, and they think he just left without it.
What the hell's that?
Again, what a strange reaction to a ringing phone. What the hell is that?
Who is this?
Turns out it's Larry's daughter Kirsty on the phone, which makes that reaction nonsensical if he gave her the phone number. While Larry talks, we find out something else about Julia, as she takes a photograph of Frank, heavily implying an affair. Moving on to moving in day, as things are unpacked and the movers with Larry take in and try shifting the bed.
You got any beer?
There's some in the fridge.
Ah, the 80s, when alcohol and handling heavy and or fragile furniture wasn't considered a bad thing. Kirsty shows up for a visit with the movers taking a particular interest in her.
That your daughter?
Uh-huh.
Got her mother's looks.
My mother's dead.
Wow, awkward. While Kirsty gets water, upstairs Julia looks at the photo of Frank tearing the woman out of it, and we get a flashback of her first meeting with him. The affair between Frank and Julia is a big part of the movie, setting up the characters' relationship, and you can just see the raw charisma from Frank.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to know.
Yeah, Frank's quite the horrible person. And I know there's that whole women like a bad boy thing, but with Julia, it's taken to a literal psychotic level. Julia is brought out of her daydream by Kirsty asking for a towel, and she continues to talk from the bathroom. Julia, however, slinks off into the rooms above and doesn't acknowledge Kirsty when she calls out to her, which might be the fastest and most random way to show that two characters don't get along, with as little effort and setup as possible. Julia moves into the attic and starts daydreaming about Frank again, with them being so romantic together. You know, by him forcing himself on her and brandishing a knife, and her not really seeing anything weird. I'm sorry, I just don't get it. Julia must be the biggest doormat, because there is nothing appealing about Frank in any way. Maybe she was just so sick of being with Larry, but seriously, who chooses knife-wielding prick above anything else? I just don't understand her devotion, which, as you'll see, is extreme to say the least. And as Julia daydreams about sex, Larry is moving the marital bed with equal amounts of thrusting and grunting. Obvious parallel is obvious. But while moving the bed, Larry hits a nail, gouging his hand pretty badly, to which he then goes up a flight of stairs, heavily bleeding I might add, just so his wife can see the wound. Who the fuck does that? The reason he does go into the attic, however, is so his blood can drip onto the floor, which could have been done better if they hadn't had the stupid bit of symbolism with the bed. Larry doing DIY in the attic, for example. It seems like nitpicking, but this film does have a rather high proportion of characters just acting weird for no discernible reason. So as I said, Julia looks at Larry's hand all the while his blood is pooling on the floor.
I'm going to throw up.
You're not going to throw up.
Man, that blood's really thick. Nothing like a load of 80s cholesterol for you. Once they leave, the blood starts to take effect, draining into the floorboards, giving life to something about to emerge. We see a beating heart has formed underneath, and from that, the boards start to bubble and creak until arms break through. And it should be noted that while the creature is forming, which is a fantastic example of practical special effects, it's the score that's one of the best parts. Have a listen. It's less of a score of horror as one might expect, but one of sheer amazement and awe that this sort of thing is happening, and it gives the effects that extra push to convince you it's real, and to make you just as amazed, which is something you don't really see in film. The creature finishes its emergence and we see it's a man, albeit a dead, rotting one. But never mind about that, it's time for the odd facial expression dinner party. For example,
Bill, I should look. You know all about that stuff. I'll call you tomorrow.
also, how about an inappropriate thing to say to a girl in front of her parents?
Okay. Okay, stop. I'm not gonna be able to stand up.
So lie down.
Julia leaves, hearing something in the attic. She goes to investigate, not really finding anything, until...
Julia?
To her surprise, it's Frank, and after convincing her it's him, he asks for her help. Meanwhile, Kirsty doing some pretty terrible drunk acting, but it was Ashley Lawrence's first film role, so I'll cut her some slack. Frank asks Julia to get him more blood so he can become whole again, and to make sure Kirsty doesn't suspect a thing, Julia stands creepily at the top of the stairs staring at her until she leaves, because as I said, movie of people acting weird. And while Kirsty walks home with the guy she met at the dinner party, a homeless guy is watching her from a doorway. He'll be important later. And that night, while thinking and probably hoping for sex with Frank, Julia accepts to help him get more blood. Usually a couple needs a divorce before they start demanding blood. Then the film gets pretentious as Kirsty has a dream of a room full of feathers with a body under a sheet bleeding through. She takes off the sheet to find it's her father. I think. It's pretty hard to tell. I have no idea what it means, and it makes no sense why anyone would be having weird prophetic dreams anyway. It's just something to raise the art quotient for the film. You know, something for people to interpret and discuss. even though it makes no sense to the film and is completely irrelevant in the long run. The next day, Julia goes on the hunt for someone to feed Frank as she picks up a man at a bar. She brings him back to the house and they kiss, but Julia is hesitant to do anything with him, to which he doesn't like.
You're gonna change your fucking mind, are you?
That little outburst is what gives Julia the confidence to kill the guy. Also, it's a good way to get the audience to be a little less sympathetic to him. Julia takes the guy into the attic. They start to undress as Frank watches from the shadows, and as the guy tries to go to the bathroom, it's hammer time, as Julia beats the guy to death, with Frank slithering to the body, absorbing the blood from it. Now that's all fine, but wouldn't it have been better to just buy animal blood for Frank? It's never really stated whether it's the blood or human life force itself that regenerates Frank, so it just seems like a pretty big step to jump straight to murder first without trying anything else. Julia looks in on Frank and he's starting to look more human and wants to touch Julia.
Come here, damn you, I want to touch you. Come to Daddy.
Him saying that is actually more important than you might realise. It'll play an important part later. Julia hides the body and slips in the bathroom, washing the blood off, visibly shaken by the ordeal. Larry comes home asking for her.
Julia, I was calling for you, didn't you hear?
Are you in there? You want a cookie, little girl?
Witness the art of Hellraiser! What the fuck? Julia goes back to Frank and he tells her that they need to hurry.
The Cenobites. It's only a matter of time before they find I've slipped them. I must get away from here.
Which is actually funny because we'll see later that the Cenobites have no idea and only find out after someone tells them to their face about Frank. Back with Kirsty, who's at work at a pet store, dealing with an unhappy customer and a kid who's irritating a snake. She spots the homeless guy from earlier doing something with the crickets. She goes to see what he's doing, but he's not stealing the crickets, he's eating them, to which she swiftly kicks him out of the place for. The homeless guy is a rather strange character because, spoiler here, he's linked to the box, but he's following Kirsty and not Julia, who is arguably the closest one to the box after Frank. My theory is he's following Kirsty because she's the next owner of the box, but I can't be sure. Meanwhile, Julia is feeding Frank and getting increasingly more comfortable with it, with a little smile showing that maybe she's even enjoying the killing. Frank is getting increasingly bloody as he's regenerating but still isn't whole yet. Julia decides now's the time to ask Frank what the fuck happened to him, as opposed to before the murders, of course. Frank shows her the box and tells Julia about the Cenobites, creatures who give the ultimate in experience, beyond pain and pleasure. Unfortunately, we don't really get to see what the Cenobites are capable of, outside of tearing someone apart with hooked chains. Which is a shame, because we never get to understand what they truly do. They're not evil per se, they're more the pure embodiment of physical sensation, pain and pleasure. It's just not depicted very well. And as you'll see in the later films, the Cenobites get less ambiguous and just become evil demons. Larry and Julia are watching boxing on TV, with Larry surprised that Julia isn't as affected as she used to be by the boxing. Meanwhile, upstairs, Frank is getting restless banging on the walls, which Larry hears and wants to go investigate, with Julia desperately trying to get him to stop, which suggests her not wanting to get caught, but also she knows what Frank would do to him, so in some way, she still actually does care for Larry, despite her extramarital indiscretions. They look in the attic and Larry finds nothing, but there are rats that Frank for some reason decided to nail to the wall. Not sure why he did that. Julia gets Larry to leave the attic by taking him to the bedroom, but that's where Frank is hiding. And he doesn't like her and Larry together. Frank approaches with a knife, with Julia thinking he's going to kill Larry, but he just does that. Was that some kind of threat? I don't get it. Also, what's with all the rat mutilation, Frank? Leave the poor things alone. You've got problems. But we already knew that. At a restaurant, Larry asks Kirsty to stop by the house to see what's wrong with Julia, which she does the next day, and Kirsty immediately sees Julia bringing another man home. Yes, not exactly a stealth operation. Julia even does one of those looks around in case she's being followed things, so we can be absolutely certain she's up to no good. Julia gets the guy upstairs once again, and throwing subterfuge to the wind, she immediately beats the man after he sees Frank in the corner. And after using Julia as a human shield, Frank grabs the guy and starts eating him. At the same time, Kirsty is searching the house trying to find evidence of Julia's infidelity, but instead she finds... Frank does well to try and convince Kirsty it's all okay, though.
No.
Kirsty, it's Frank. It's Uncle Frank.
No.
You remember?
No.
Come to Daddy.
Wow, so on top of looking like he had the closest all-body shave ever, he also says come to Daddy to his niece. What exactly was he trying to achieve there? Kirsty gets cornered in the attic by Frank, but contrary to 80s horror movies, she fights back, grabbing a handful of his internal organs, and also... Well, it's safe to assume those have grown back. But Kirsty, while searching for a weapon, grabs the box instead.
Give me that.
She moves to the door with the box at ransom, and to ensure her escape...
You want it?
Give me the box!
You want it? Fucking have it!
I ain't gonna lie, that was pretty satisfying on a few levels. It's great to see Frank get a little of what's coming to him. Also, it's great to see a horror movie female not afraid to punch and kick instead of just running and screaming. Kirsty, mentally and physically distraught, wanders the streets until she finally collapses under the stress, with people gathering around her. And hey, is that George Clooney? Only more balding? The movie gets arty on us again with a random scene of a flower opening, which I would interpret and give you little bits of information like it's the same flower on the house's windows, but honestly, what would it add to the film? I hate pseudo-intellectual bullshit about films, because it makes it something to study rather than to be enjoyed. A film is entertainment, not a thesis. Interpretation of character and writing is fine, but when you start talking about every little minutia of detail, then I'm sorry, but you can't see the forest for the trees. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now. Kirsty wakes up in the hospital a little confused.
You're awake. Good girl.
My, aren't you needlessly creepy? The nurse gets the doctor and he gives the puzzle box to Kirsty, hoping to jog her memory, as she says she doesn't remember what happened. Kirsty is left with the box and she's compelled to investigate what it might be, inadvertently activating a part of it which starts a pleasing melody. She investigates further until she activates the box, causing the melody to turn sinister, with it changing its shape and opening. However, unlike the hooked chains Frank got, it opens a passageway through the wall to some unknown place. Kirsty walks through the corridor until she sees something in the way. Now don't be fooled. It may look like a monster is chasing Kirsty down the corridor, but what it actually is the worst effect in the entire movie. Don't believe me? You can actually see parts of the scaffold holding and moving the thing down the corridor. It's a shame because the sequence doesn't really need to be there at all. It's just a crappy effect for no reason. The movie's better off without it. Kirsty, after being chased, makes it back to her hospital room, but that creature was the least of her worries after opening the box. She tries to get the box back into its original shape, but that's when the Cenobites show up, in what is honestly the best scene in the film. A chime or bell is heard as the room changes. After all, Cenobite means member of a religious order. The bell is almost like a call to mass for them, and then they appear. First, Chatra appears, who subdues Kirsty, then the rest of them, with Pinhead explaining to Kirsty that the box is a means to summon the Cenobites, and she wants to know who they are.
Explorers in the further regions of experience. Demons to some, angels to others.
Now I think that's a very interesting way of them referring to themselves. It's not them, it's you that determines whether they are evil or not. They don't go about killing indiscriminately either. They only take those who open the box, and to them, that's you saying you desire what they offer, and it doesn't matter who you are. So really, it's Frank who's the real monster of the movie. The Cenobites are just neutral observers. Kirsty has an idea, however.
Wait! Please wait!
No time for argument.
You've done this before, right?
Many, many times.
To a man called Frank Cotton.
Oh, yes.
She intends to give them Frank in exchange for herself, because, as I said, the Cenobites didn't know he was gone. But the leader reluctantly agrees to Kirsty's terms with a catch.
Perhaps we prefer you. I want to hear him confess himself. Then, maybe...
Then, cue the badass line to end the scene.
But if you hate us, we'll tear your soul apart.
That is my favourite scene of the entire film. Everything about it is awesome, with the Cenobites given a grand introduction. This is the first time we've seen them properly after all, and it allows them to explain themselves to the audience so we know who they are and what they do. And it shows that they can be reasoned with. To a point. More on that later. Julia and Frank discuss what to do if Kirsty goes to the police, but Frank's not worried about that. He needs a skin so he can evade the Cenobites, and he and Julia make the only choice they have at such short notice. Julia meets Larry as he comes in and tells him there's something he needs to see upstairs. And then he just comes back downstairs like nothing happened. What a strange scene. He goes up, comes down without incident. No, obviously that's Frank wearing Larry's skin. Not sure that's how it works though. You can't just wear someone's skin and expect it to not only fit, but make you look exactly like the previous owner. And that night, Julia has sex with the new Frank, like she always wanted. Also, the film was originally going to be called The Hellbound Heart, after the novella, but the distributor didn't like that, saying it sounded like a romance movie. So Clive Barker asked the production for a new name, and one of the crew, a 60-year-old woman, said, "What a woman would do for a good fuck." I kinda wish they went with that title. So damn appropriate. Kirsty goes to the house hoping to tell Larry about Frank in the attic, one step behind of course. Julia opens the door being evasive but lets her in, and Kirsty finds Larry glad he's alright and tries to tell him about Frank. But he says he already knows, and he says he killed Frank, which is bad for Kirsty because she doesn't have anything to give to the Cenobites. Kirsty insists on seeing Frank, but really it's Larry's body she's left alone with, and the Cenobites appear again.
We want the man who did this.
No.
Kirsty refuses to give up who she thinks is her father. However, the Cenobites know that Frank took Larry's skin, so in reality, the Cenobites are just trying to fulfill their deal, and it's Kirsty who's been fooled by Frank and doesn't realise it. Kirsty wants to leave with her father, but then Frank gives himself away.
Come to Daddy.
Oh my God.
See, I told you that'd be important later. It's kind of telling of Frank's personality that is his preferred phrase to use. Ugh. Also, at a side note, why does his voice change? I know we're debating a guy wearing another guy's skin, and I can deal with that, but I have my limits. Kirsty realises it's Frank, gouging his face pretty badly to get away. Julia grabs a hold of her while Frank comes at her with a knife, but she moves, causing Frank to stab Julia instead. And showing what kind of person Frank really is, he starts to absorb her, practically killing her. And I gotta commend Andrew Robinson's acting here. Being able to go from Larry to Frank so easily and so quickly is really impressive. And he's really convincing as Frank, who's completely different to Larry in every way. This needed to be acted well and sold to the audience, and I think it's done perfectly. Kirsty runs upstairs to hide, and surprise Jesus! No one make a joke about Jesus coming out of the closet. Kirsty searches for a place to hide, finding a place behind boxes. There's a gross out moment as she finds one of the bodies Julia left up there, which surprisingly she keeps quiet throughout and makes it out of the room. Kirsty takes some time to recover, but Frank comes out of the attic, cornering her there once again with his knife. And what was it the Cenobite said?
I want to hear him confess himself.
And that's when Frank gives the game away.
Everything's all right. Frank's here.
Bastard!
Your dear old Uncle Frank.
Which causes the room to change as the Cenobites have come to collect.
Frank.
No. We had to hear it from your own lips.
The Cenobites tell Kirsty to leave and they begin their work with, you guessed it, hooked chains as they literally peel him in half. But Frank has time for some last words.
Jesus wept.
That was quite the end to Frank, and his last words were originally written as "fuck you," which lacks the eloquence of what we actually got, which was ad-libbed by Andrew Robinson, and it works perfectly for the film and for Frank's character. Also, that little laugh he does at the end, suggesting that maybe he's getting some enjoyment out of it after all. Kirsty makes her way down the stairs, but is stopped by the female Cenobite, and finding Julia, who has for some reason opened the box, Pinhead comes to take Kirsty back with them.
We have such sights to show you.
But Kirsty manages to use the box, banishing Pinhead back where he came from. Yeah, that's how little they thought of Pinhead in the beginning. He's the first to be killed off, for lack of a better phrase, and is given all of 9 minutes screen time in the entire film. Makes such a difference compared to later when Pinhead was all that people cared about. The house starts to crumble as Kirsty sends more of the Cenobites back. You'll notice the lightning effects are pretty bad. That's because they ran out of budget, and Clive Barker himself and someone else had to animate the effects by hand. It turned out pretty well considering. Steve shows up for Kirsty, but the aptly named Butterball appears behind him to attack, but he's rather ceremoniously crushed. He doesn't even get a hand-painted effects-laden send-off. And speaking of bad effects, the creature comes back again to make the production look worse, and Kirsty fights with it for the box. And it's not the man who saves her, she saves him, as he's useless. She solves the box, causing the creature to burst into flames. And after leaving the house, Kirsty attempts to burn the box, throwing it onto a fire, but the homeless man from earlier appears. The homeless guy takes the box, causing him to catch fire, transforming him into some kind of winged beast, flying off with the box. And the final scene shows the seller from the beginning making another transaction. So that was Hellraiser, one of the more infamous horror movies out there, and it's fucking awesome. I'm serious, Hellraiser is a fantastic horror, which is subtle yet over the top at the same time, with great acting from Andrew Robinson, Claire Higgins, even Ashley Lawrence, despite it being her first film. And of course the Cenobites made an impression, Pinhead specifically, as he's instantly recognisable by any horror fan. And from the sheer presence Doug Bradley gives the character in this film, it's certainly not surprising. But I'm sure you can tell, success begets sequels, especially for horror movies. So yeah, prepare to tumble down this rabbit hole. See you next... Oh crap. Hello? Huh.